guys, so welcome back to my channel. I want to discuss something that might be a little bit triggering for people because there's talk of loss in it, and so if this is not your thing, then please just don't watch. But I wanted to talk about something that I've recently just found out, which I was severely shocked about, wasn't expecting, but is important to discuss in case somebody else is going through the same thing. So I'm gonna go back to when I was a bit younger. This was back in 2012. My husband and I separated after 10 years. And we have 3 great kids, but back when I was pregnant with my son, I was pregnant with twins and didn't know until I started bleeding roughly around 9 weeks, 10 weeks of pregnancy, and found that I had 2 sacs and that it looked like they were both sharing the same placenta, which is probably why baby B didn't make it, but my son made it, which I'm really thankful for. But after I had him, I had problems with heavy bleeding, and that persisted for roughly around 18 months. I think out of the whole 18 months, because I was trialing different medications, contraceptions, devices, whatnot, to try and stop that bleeding, I think I only had about 2 weeks periodically, like spread out over the 18 months, that I'd actually stopped bleeding for. So when I was pregnant with my son, I was struggling with every pregnancy I've had something called symphysis pubis dysfunction. Obviously at the time I didn't realise I had Ehlers-Danlos syndrome, so it was probably down to that I had this issue in the first place. But I made a decision to at the age of 27, sorry my voice is going today, I made the decision at the age of 27 to ask my doctor, could I opt for an elective cesarean and possibly have my tubes tied, and I was told the following information. I was told they don't typically do tubal ligation with people under the age of 35, and that a decision like that should never be made while a woman is pregnant, in case something happens. And obviously I'd already lost a baby during that pregnancy, so there was a high risk that I could potentially lose the other baby. So the decision was made, because I was 27, that yeah, it was probably a hasty decision and therefore I shouldn't technically do that, and the doctor wouldn't have agreed to it anyway. But I was also told that as a couple, because my husband never came to my appointment with me when I saw my consultant, I was told as a couple we shouldn't be discussing things like not having any more kids or anything like that until after my child was born, healthy and fine and everything like that, in case something happened. Unfortunately my now ex-husband, we didn't separate because of this, but my now ex-husband at that time decided, while I was heavily pregnant, that he didn't want any more children, and he had booked in for the procedure to stop him from having any more kids for 10 days after my son was born. I wasn't 100% agreeable with him, because it wasn't my decision, and obviously after I'd had that discussion with my doctor, I decided that he's right, you know, I'm only 27, I could want more kids as I get older, so therefore I didn't really see the point of having a procedure to stop me from having any more kids. Anyway, fast forward to when my son was born. Like I said, 10 days later, my now ex-husband had his procedure. I had heavy bleeding for 18 months with a 2-week gap spaced out over them 18 months. So after trialing a lot of medications, things like tranexamic acid, contraceptive pills, contraceptive devices, all different types of things, I went back to gynecology, and they decided that the best option would be to give me a endometrial ablation. They basically described it as something that would stem my bleeding and lighten it up. And they checked my file and basically stated that it was the best way forward, especially considering the fact my husband had a vasectomy done. Well, of course, I was kind of like not really asking questions at that time. I was so tired because of all the bleeding that I just wanted it to stop. To kind of dismiss what they just said about my husband, and I just asked him, like, would it stop my bleeding? Like, will it, like, put me back to normal? And he said it should do, yes. So my procedure was booked in for the 24th or 25th of June 2012, and just before that, my husband and I had separated. He'd moved out a couple of days prior. We'd obviously agreed to separate a few months earlier than that, and he'd moved out 2 days before my operation. So in order to look after me after my procedure and help me with the kids, my brother, who I currently live with, who is also my carer now, came down to visit for a week on leave because he was in the army at the time, so that he could spend some quality time with his daughter, and so that he could stay at mine to help me with my kids. And obviously my mum lived next door at the time as well, so I had both of them on hand. And I went into hospital, had the procedure done, and when I was leaving the hospital, I basically got told the following information. So they said, you know, it seems to be okay, everything's fine, I'll probably bleed for maybe like 10 days or so, and then it should ease off. However, they were going to tell me that chances are I would need to go on some form of permanent contraceptive devices or prescriptions or whatever, because getting pregnant would be extremely difficult. But they can see by my file that my husband had the procedure to stop him from having more kids. So therefore they didn't need to tell me that information. And I just kind of went, hold on, what do you mean? Like, why is the fact that he has had that done and me needing contraceptive important? Like, what's that for? And he just turned around and said, well, endometrial ablation is done for people that don't want any more children, and it's not usually advised for people that still want more kids. But we can see from your file that your husband has had a procedure to stop that from happening, so you won't need to use contraception and things like that, unless obviously something happens and you end up in a new relationship, because getting pregnant would be extremely difficult. And even if you did get pregnant, there's a very high mortality rate for both you and baby. And I was like so confused about what he just said. And I explained to him that me and my husband were no longer me and my husband anymore. It was just me. And bear in mind, at this point in my life, I was 27 years old. So of course they're like, okay, like, well, why didn't you know this information already? And I was like, no. Like, they basically, I remember him saying something about my husband at the time having the procedure to stop him from having children, but no one ever said anything to me about not being able to have any more kids or anything. And he said, well, you know, he said some people, you know, the ablation does kind of sidetracked a little bit and said the ablation can sometimes, you know, just stem the bleeding, so technically it'll leave enough lining behind to make sure that you can still have more kids, so you might be one of the lucky ones. But yeah, it wouldn't be recommended, but you know, you'd probably be fine. and he kind of just rushed himself out of the room and kind of run off. So I couldn't really ask any more questions, so I kind of just dismissed it, and I went home, and obviously I was in a lot of pain and I recovered, but my bleeding persisted for longer than 10 days, and it turned out that I had an endometrial infection, so I ended up on antibiotics. No sooner did I finish the antibiotics, my bleeding had finished, and I had a cycle every month without fail. They were so light that I didn't really need to use any products. I did for a couple of months, and then it kind of just eased off to the point where I didn't need to use any products at all. It wasn't heavy enough, so I was like, okay, that's fine. I mean, obviously I'd still use them because, you know, you just don't want to, you know, get to that point where you have an accident, but like I didn't really need to use them. So anyway, I was having a cycle every month, and then they'd kind of go to like every 2 months or every 3 months, and then they'd go back to every month again, and then they'd kind of like start being all over the place. So I went to see my doctor when I first got into a relationship after mine and my husband's relationship ended. When I first had my first relationship, I went to speak to my doctor, and I asked them, you know, would I be able to have more children? And they said, as long as you're still having cycles, then yes, you should be able to have more children. So I said, fine. A couple of years later, I moved area, so I went to my doctors where I currently live, and I explained the situation to them, and they basically turned around and said to me, well, there's always a way that we can help you have more children in the future, so, you know, don't be worrying about it. And then all of a sudden, I seen a gynecologist, because I saw a gynecologist not long after my ablation anyway, and they said to me that eventually, at some point in the future, my periods would stop completely. And I said, but I never got told any of this information before I had this procedure done, and I was originally told that I couldn't have my tubes tied because I was under the age of 35, and in case something happened, like my marriage ended or I wanted more kids in the future, and yet you've done a procedure on me that has now warranted me not to be able to have any more kids. And they were like, well, you wanted it, like, kind of thing, kind of putting all the blame on me. But I wasn't told the full facts. So when I moved, I asked my GP, and they were like, yeah, you should be able to have more children, but we might be able to help you with that as well, should that arise. At the time, I wasn't in a relationship, so I just thought I'd ask, for future reference, sorry. And I was happy with that. I was like, okay, that's fine. And then about 6 months later, I got in a relationship with a guy, and he really wanted kids and stuff, and I was like, well, I was told that I could still have them, but obviously it was early days, and I didn't want to kind of like just go straight into like, let's try for children and stuff. So I kind of that kind of fizzled out after probably a few weeks, and because I wasn't 100% ready and stuff like that. And then my health started to deteriorate in 2016, and I wasn't like, my hips were killing me and stuff like that, and since then my health has just got worse and worse and worse. So about 4 years ago, I went back to my doctor, and at this point my menstrual cycles were like, one of them would be like once a month, then it'd be like every 4 months, then it'd be like every 6 months, then it'd be like every 2 months, then it'd be all over the place. So I asked again about more kids and stuff like that. I was actually it was about 3 years ago, actually, no 4 years ago. I was actually talking to a guy online, and really handsome guy online, his name was Scott, and we had met up a couple of times, not done anything, but just met up a couple of times. And, you know, I wanted to know for future reference, because we really liked each other and stuff, and I was really like, you know, really wanting to find out what the future may hold for us and things like that. So I asked again, you know, would there be a possible chance for me to have children? I said, because, you know, I need to know, because I have 3 kids that already rely on me, my health is getting worse, and I'm in a new relationship, and I just want to know whether there's a possibility there, because I'm still having cycles and stuff. They checked my LH and FSH levels. They told me everything was fine. I'd had a few scans that told me that other than a fibroid, all my lining and everything looked healthy. So, but the answer I received back off my doctor was not the answer I was actually thinking they were going to give me. The answer I got was, because of how light my cycles were, because of how sporadic they were, they would eventually stop. Again, I got told that information. And therefore, should I become pregnant, given the fact that I have 3 children that rely on me already, and given the fact that my health is quite bad, medically they would suggest termination, because it would be the healthiest thing all round, because there's a very high risk of me, a mortality rate with me, because of the baby could basically embed into the uterine wall instead of actually where the lining is, and that could cause me to have problems if the baby ever came to term, which is very unlikely, and that even if the baby did take in a normal place, the baby could inevitably pass away because it may not reach term, or it could end up not getting the nutrients it needed because there's not enough lining. So it would be better all round, and it could still cause a catastrophic bleeding for me. So it would be best for all round, for if I was to ever get pregnant, to have a termination. So the likelihood of me ever having more kids again was gone, and I wasn't able to have any more. And I broke down. Like, I was really upset about it. I was angry at my ex-husband for having the procedure he had 10 days after my son was born, even though I wasn't with him anymore, because they based my whole endometrial ablation on the fact that he'd had that procedure. And I was just so angry and upset. And I came to the conclusion, like, eventually, like, it took me about a good 18 months, that it was okay, because, you know, I've got 3 beautiful children. I don't really need any more, you know, and I'm getting iller and iller every year. So it's probably for the best, and I kind of made peace with it. And then I didn't have a period for 450 odd days up until last August. So I'd not had a period in over a year and a half, and I ended up had my nasal jejunostomy tube fitted last year in April, and then I had a cycle in, I think it was like beginning of August, September sometime last year, and I just presumed it was because I had the nutrients and the fluids that I needed. And then I had another cycle just shortly after that, and then my NJ tube was removed in October, and then I didn't have another cycle. So I just presumed it was down to the fact that I was having the nutrients and stuff that my body needed, and that's why I was having cycles again, because obviously they stopped again straight after my tube was removed. So I was like, that's fine. And then January this year, I ended up with an 8-day cycle, which normally my cycles would typically last maybe a day, half a day, up to 2 days maximum. And I'd barely noticed them. But this one lasted 8 days. It was noticeable. Products were needed. And I actually stopped after 5 days, and I'd been booked in for a cervical smear. They basically told me that there was no active bleeding, so they could proceed with the smear test. And then within an hour or so after having that smear done, I went back onto bleeding again and bled for another couple of days. So I started panicking, thinking, like, that's never happened before. I don't typically bleed after a smear. Like, I don't understand. So I was worried that my test was going to come back with an abnormality. It didn't. It came back fine. So that was fine, and I just presumed it'd be a while now, because it's been such a long period, that it'd be a while before I had another one. But 33 days later I came back on again, and it lasted for 24 hours, which I thought was my typical norm for a period to last 24 hours. And I thought I won't have another one now for a while. And then lo and behold, 32 days later I had yet another one. So of course I'm now sat there like wondering what the hell's going on. So I contacted my doctor, and my doctor has now informed me that now I'm nearly 40 years old, where normally women are trying to look into menopause and things like that. my body has now reverted. So my endometrial ablation has now gone into late stage endometrial ablation failure, which basically means that my uterus has now started producing the lining again, and I'm now having regular periods every month. Along with them periods, I'm having extreme pelvic pain, so that's not a good thing. It could mean that there's a blood collecting in my uterus which is not able to escape from where it's supposed to escape from. Having a fibroid doesn't help that. So I've got to keep an eye on the pelvic pain. I was originally putting it down to bladder spasms due to my urinary retention, but I think it's more down to the problems I'm having with my uterus at the moment. So I've now been informed that there's a very high chance I can get pregnant, and obviously there is still a great risk there if I was to get pregnant for it to cause problems. So I'd have to use protection without a doubt now. But yeah, like, I'm so annoyed at the fact that it's after all of these years being told that eventually I would never be able to have kids again, that eventually my periods would stop altogether and I'd never have any more. For now to be told that the biggest gap I've ever had is 450 odd days, and then all of a sudden my body's reverted back, is like mind-blowing. And I don't want to put my mind back to, oh yay, now I can have kids, because it's dangerous for anybody who's healthy to even have a child over 40. It becomes more problematic and can become dangerous. But for somebody who's had uterine ablation, it can actually be even more dangerous. So I don't want to put my mind back into that frame of, oh yay, if I'm in a relationship I can now go and have a child, because I've made peace with the fact that I'm not allowed to have any more, and that chances are I'd have to abort, and I wouldn't really want to terminate a pregnancy. I'd rather deal with the consequences of using contraception than actually go through a termination. No offense to anyone that's had a termination, it's just my preference. I don't believe in it because I'm Catholic. So but yeah, like, I really do not I know that sounds Irish because obviously Catholic people don't use contraception usually, but I am an avid believer in not getting pregnant by using the right methods, but I'd rather do that than obviously terminate a fetus. So yeah, I'm kind of a little bit gutted that I've now been told this at nearly 40, that I probably could have had kids to begin with, like all them years ago when I was asking, and it probably would have been fine. But lo and behold, like, I've now been told at nearly 40 that there is a high chance I can get pregnant again. Although it's risky, I'm still can't get my head around it, but I really don't want to put my mind there, because I've already grieved that. I've already grieved the loss of being able to have more kids. I've already grieved all of that. I don't want to have to go through that grieving process again, because with all the pelvic pain I'm having and everything like that, it could end up resulting in having to have more surgery, to basically either have a hysterectomy or to remove the rest of the lining. I wouldn't have to have another endometrial ablation, but I would have to have a histoscopy to basically almost have like a DNC type procedure, to get rid of the rest of the lining and the fibroid, which could be causing the pelvic pain. And I don't want to have to go through that whole grieving process again. So I'm not putting my mind in that mind frame, but I just want people to know that if you're in the same situation and you've had an endometrial ablation, and you're still having periods every month, be wary that chances are that your endometrial ablation may have failed, that there is a very high risk that you could still get pregnant, although it is quite dangerous, and that there is a percentage that you could end up, after so many years of it failing, I think the failure rate is up to 15 years after you've had endometrial ablation. Most people would revert back after 3 years. I was having, although not very regular, I was having periods for the whole time up until just before last August, and then obviously I'd had a gap of 450 off days prior to that. So that's like a year and a half of 9.5. So I've had menstrual cycles for 8.5, like 8 years, even after my ablation. So for them 8 years, I could have had kids, no problem. And now obviously I'm back on having regular cycles again. So yeah, it is mind blowing, but there's only a 25% failure rate. And obviously I'm in that 25%. I have to be in that 25%. I'm just an awkward so-and-so when it comes to illnesses and things failing. But yeah, like my cardiac ablation failed and now this is reverted and failed. So I just want people to know that there is a risk, and if you're unsure about anything, please speak to your GP and your doctor, because you know, you need to know all the facts. I didn't know all the facts before I had my uterine ablation. I wish I'd known all the facts. If I'd have known the facts, I would never have had it done in the first place. I probably should have just had a DNC done, to get rid of any extra lining that was there from having my baby, but they decided to do endometrial ablation. That was down on the hospital's problem, and I didn't know any better, but I do now. So yeah, just be wary, make sure you ask questions, make sure you know all the facts and know what you're getting into before you have it done. I apologise that this video is so long, but I just wanted to clarify what mind-blowing things I've been told the last couple of days. Like, it's just mind-blowing. Like, I honestly, there's no other word for it. So yeah, thank you for watching. If you've got this far, I know it's a long video, I do apologise. If you've got any questions, then please DM me, or send me a message below, or DM me on my Instagram, which I'll tag underneath like I always do. You'll probably notice that I've changed my name from My Life with Chronic Illnesses to chronically.genie_. This is so that all of my social media has the same name, so that I'm easier to find, so that makes things easier. Plus, My Life with Chronic Illnesses is a bit of a long title. So yeah, I will tag the new one underneath, and thank you again for watching, and I will speak to you again soon. Please subscribe and thumbs up if you've enjoyed this video, and yeah, take care. Bye.